You're listening to Ask Dr. Jake. My name is Dr. Jake Tucker. I'm the owner and founder of Good Life Family Chiropractic here on the south side of Lincoln, Nebraska. And we're coming to you today with another message of hope, health, and wholeness. And just, every single week, I'm reminded that I just need to share my story. As many awesome patient stories as I have coming through here, the reason why I became a chiropractor was made eminently clear to me just this past spring. My son, he was born the week before COVID hit and everything shut down. That 14 days that turned into who knows at this point, maybe 14 years. But Ezekiel has been such a blessing to our lives during this time. We walked into the hospital and things were normal. We walked out and everything was shut down, but it didn't matter to us because we were so blessed to have this little bundle of joy. Now, Ezekiel's our third, and I've been doing this thing called chiropractic for a number of years now, and so we knew that we had to invest in his health. He was adjusted from birth. He only ate the best. My wife only ate the best. She's been breastfeeding him exclusively for the first 5 months of his life. And, we started, we actually were able, both of us, to go back to work. Me, because I'm an essential healthcare worker. People rely on me for their health. And then my wife, she was able to go back on a limited basis as things opened up. And so we put him in daycare. Well, it was August 26th. I'd been going through a morning shift as typical. We were about 15 minutes from closing down for the morning, and I get a phone call. And I don't normally take phone calls, but it was a little slower in that moment. And so I happened to be at the front. I saw it was my wife. I picked up and she said, "Jake, Zeke stopped breathing. We got to get to the hospital." And so I dropped everything, canceled the rest of my morning appointments, and went out to St. E's here in Lincoln. And on the way, I got the story. Apparently, Zeke had been going down for a nap and went to flip from his back to his stomach, let out a squawk. And when the daycare worker came over to check on him, he wasn't breathing anymore. He was non-responsive. It took 2 rounds of rescue breathing and CPR to get him to start responding again. And when he woke up, the paramedics had arrived. He was seizing. He was shaking uncontrollably. He was gasping for breath. He was struggling. And so they rushed him to the emergency room. And so I met him there, and it hadn't been probably more than 15 minutes since it had all started. But while I'm getting this story, I go to him because I see him doing the exact same things that they're describing that they had seen on site. And my hands as I pick him up to comfort him, my hands just instinctively go to his spine. And I feel his neck, which is hard not to do in his case because his atlas, the top bone in his neck that's supposed to be protecting his brainstem and his cranial nerves, it's shoved off to the side. Just so bad that I feel anybody could have felt it. And so, of course, I'm praying for him, and I'm praying over him, and I'm praying for healing. But I start massaging that vertebra back into place, praying that God would restore health in his body. And as I'm doing so, I feel his body start to calm down. I feel him start to relax and take a deep breath. I feel him stop shaking and stop seizing. And he fell asleep. And he woke up and he nursed and he fell back asleep. And that began this journey of us just trying to figure out what it was that caused the problem. It came out in the next several hours that apparently that morning he had rolled off the bed. My wife had caught him by the head and neck, and it just so happened my daughter, who's two and a half years old, was not wanting to put her pants on and was trying to kick him off and happened to hit him in the head while she did so. And so that stress on his head and neck was enough to dislodge atlas, to disrupt his brainstem and some of those cranial nerves as they controlled how he breathed and how his brain was functioning. And as a chiropractor, that made a lot of sense to me. But as I tried to explain that to the medical doctors, it just didn't make any sense to them. And meanwhile, we're doing tests like blood tests and an MRI and a CT scan and a spinal tap and chest x-rays and an EEG, and they can't find anything abnormal. They continue to remark over and over again. This is at Children's Hospital in Omaha, one of the best hospitals in the country for this type of thing. They couldn't find anything wrong with him. In fact, they kept remarking, on how far advanced he was and how healthy he was. And it just really blows me away because, the one thing that they tried to reprimand us about, had absolutely nothing to do with anything that had happened. They found all negative tests and they were so concerned with infectious disease being part of this process, in spite of all their negative tests, that they actually sent in a pathologist to sit down with me and express his concerns about potential pathologies that might create similar issues in him in the future if we don't follow their protocols. I said, well, obviously my protocols are working just fine. Here's what I found. Here's the rationale behind it. But they're so caught up in this symptom model of healthcare that they didn't listen to me. But I say this really brought me around to why I became a chiropractor, because at 6 months old, I experienced the exact same thing. Except at 6 months old for me, it wasn't a first time problem. It was a problem that had been going on for 6 months, because at 2 weeks old, the day of my first well check, my mom brought me home from the doctor's office after a clean bill of health, was breastfeeding me. And she said that at that moment, she noticed me turning blue. I had quit breathing while breastfeeding. And she said that the look in my eyes was just that of pure panic. And so she was able to get me resuscitated, rushed me to the emergency room, and they started monitoring me, and they watched me all night. I quit breathing 17 times that night. And they started looking for causes, started doing their tests, the exact same tests that they did for my son, they did for me. But instead of it being a thing that had been resolved where they found nothing, it was a thing that continued to happen and they just had no answers for. So they sent me to specialists. They went, I went to about a dozen different specialists before I ended up at the University of Michigan Children's Hospital. And still, they had nothing for me. The best thing that they could tell my mom is that hopefully I would grow out of it. Well, this took about 6 months. And the average amount of times I would quit breathing in a night was 14. And it wasn't until my mom's best friend said, "Why don't you try my chiropractor?" that I even had my spine and central nervous system evaluated. He took one look at me and he knew exactly what the problem was. My head was cocked over to one side, one eye was open larger than the other, and one pupil was dilated larger than the other. And he went right to the top of my neck. And again, atlas, that top bone in my neck, where it's supposed to be protecting my brainstem and those cranial nerves, had been twisted around and laterally rotated over to the side, such that it was interfering with the expression of health and life and vitality to my lungs through the vagus nerve. And he did one adjustment. And either weekly or bi-weekly after that, he continued to adjust me. And I've never had a breathing problem since that first adjustment. And that may even be the reason why I became a chiropractor. And you go, God might have brought it full circle from there, because I actually went to chiropractic school thinking that I was just getting in this, like most people think, to be a specialist in neck pain, back pain, and headaches. And while we do offer phenomenal care for people that are suffering with those things, it's not because we treat those things or those symptoms, but because we address the cause of those things. And in so many more cases, we address the cause in preventing those things from happening in the first place, because we're looking at health and life and vitality. And so some of you might be sitting there and thinking to yourself, you know what? That sounds just like what my niece or nephew went through, or sounds just like what I went through as a baby, or my kid's going through that right now. And they've never had their nervous system evaluated. They're taking all these antipsychotics, all these anti-seizure medications. They're on breathing treatments. They've been diagnosed with asthma, but they don't think it's true asthma. They think it's a different rare kind of asthma, but they have no answers for this thing. They can't tell me what's causing it. They keep blaming the immune system. They say it's an autoimmune condition. They keep saying that God created them imperfectly. And let me tell you this, God doesn't make mistakes. God's got a plan for each and every one of us. God didn't intend for any of this to happen, but he does allow the laws and principles of health and healing to govern the outcomes. And when we interfere with those, when we interfere with the central nervous system, first off, we're going to reap the repercussions of that. And I see that the more I dive into health, the more I dive into these different conditions and the things that cause these conditions, it's more about the choices that we make and the experiences that we go through than who our parents were, or how we were born, or anything about our genetics. Genetics is such a small part of this. We have so much control over this. And if you haven't had a chance to have your nervous system looked at, I suggest you pick up the phone and you type this number in and you send me a text. I'm standing by to answer your text messages. That's 402-413-8825. This is my personal cell phone number. 402-413-8825. I'm standing by to take your text and to set you up with a free virtual consultation. Or if you'd rather come to the office, we can set up a full exam, digital nerve scan, and x-rays for a 50% discount for the first 5 text messages that I receive. Again, that's 402-413-8825. And yes, it does start with your nervous system. All health starts with your nervous system. That's where God breathed his life into when he created you out of that sperm and the egg. And the first organ system to form was your central nervous system. Off of that system formed every other system in your body. It's what continues to keep your heart beating. It's what continues to keep your lungs breathing. It's what determines whether you're living or dead, is just how well that signal is traveling through your nervous system. And if you've never had that evaluated, the first thing you need to do is you need to text me, 402-413-8825. You can also go to our website, goodlifefamilychiropractic.com, and you can ask for a free virtual consultation there. It'll take you to a page to schedule that. You'll get about 15 minutes with me on the phone. So just make sure that you're getting that. And then too, if you want to watch these videos, if you want to see a picture of me and my baby boy, Zeke, when he was first born, we've got this up on facebook.com/AskDrJake. And you can also listen to these shows. If you've missed any during the week, download this show wherever you find your podcasts. Just look for Ask Dr. Jake, whether it's on Apple, the podcast store, or if you're doing Google Play or any of these other stores that are out there, like Spotify, like Stitcher. We're on all of them. And so it's just a matter of getting there and downloading them. And maybe this is something you need to share with friends and family. Maybe you need to tag someone in a post or forward it to them, or just like it to help us out. But if you want to support this podcast, if you want to support this show, definitely leave us a 5-star review wherever you're listening. And if that's on the radio, then go to Google and look for my chiropractic clinic, Good Life Family Chiropractic, goodlifefamilychiropractic.com. You can leave us a review there, and we'd be more than grateful to hear your kind words and your support of what we're doing here in Lincoln, in God's name, for the healing of his people, so that they can express life and health and vitality to the full, and ultimately fulfill the purposes and plans that he has for each and every one of us. So, thank you for listening today. It always surprises me when I get one of you come into my office and you haven't heard this story. And so I've just made it a point that I share this story each and every week so that you guys really understand why it is I'm doing it, what my heart is for the community. Be sure to join me again tomorrow for another episode of Ask Dr. Jake.